Hello, and welcome to No One Can Hear You Pod. I am Nick Lydon, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, John McKittrick. In today's episode, we will be discussing The Social Network. This movie was released in 2010 and directed by David Fincher. Our conversation will cover how it got greenlit and general production history, its most memorable scenes and performances, its score, cinematography, and lastly, how has the film aged in a world where Facebook, now Meta, has increasingly had more and more influence in our lives and society at large. One more thing I do want to add, we start every episode by briefly touching on movies that we've seen recently, both contemporaries and classic, and I know John and I want to talk a bit about some of the Oscar nominations that just came out, but feel free to jump ahead using the timestamps in the description. So all that said, John, how are we doing? How's life?
I'm good. I think that was a great intro. You really nailed that.
Thank
you. I like the energy.
I've been rehearsing it.
No, I could tell. But in a good way.
Well, we got to get that audience retention up, John. I mean, it's really a key KPI. It's a KKPI, and trying to lock them in a little bit better here.
Yeah. Okay. I'm with you. So recently, I have seen two movies that I wanted to talk to you about.
Okay.
One is Rodan. You ever heard of Rodan?
Oh, I actually had. You're not gonna believe me that I had, but I had.
Okay. Well, why?
Because I played the Godzilla video games as a kid, and Rodan was like the guy. So
yeah, he's part of the Godzilla extended universe. But he has.
Okay? So I saw that you watched this. Are you going to be going through all the Godzilla movies? It feels like this is your sick completionist fantasy. There's like 90 of them.
I know. I feel like that's way too hard with those. I think I like the completionist thing, but I like it when it's like a shorter series, like seven or eight movies is good.
I mean, I think Godzilla and Kong, I can't remember what the name of the one that came out this past year was, but that most recent one I think was like the fifth highest grossing movie of the year last year. I think it got like 500 million or something.
Oh, I'm not surprised. People like, they're great entertaining movies. I mean, it's a specific genre that I don't know if I'm into yet. I think that's the real answer. I would try to go through them all, because that would be a fun achievement, but like I'm not so excited about like watching guys in suits. But after watching this and like listening to people talk about it, I understand why it's respected so much because of all the models and like the costumes, and like it is very like it's a cool genre to appreciate. I'm just not sure if I'm ready to dive in on that.
And this movie, it came out in like 1960 or something,
like
right?
56, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it really is fascinating. I mean, now I feel like it's pretty well documented. But as a kid, I just wasn't really aware that the genre that is Godzilla, like himself, is really like an overt reaction to the nuclear bombs that went off there in World War II. I mean, like once you hear that, you're like, oh, that makes complete sense, the idea of this. But really fascinating subject matter.
No, I think it is one of those things where, like, when you hear it, you're like, oh, of course, that's like so obvious. But then when you think about the movies through that lens, because the same with me, I didn't think about that growing up. But now that I'm watching the movies thinking about that, it's like, oh, okay.
Well, especially if you were actually Japanese, like if you were from Japan, I'm sure. I mean, like even hearing like the origin for that or the inspiration for it, it's like jarring. But like imagine if you were like actually thinking to yourself like, oh, that was like a fun action movie, but a little bit over the top or silly, and then you're like, oh, that actually happened to a city that like my grandparents or whoever lived in, or like had. So anyway, and we're strictly talking about nuclear powers for the rest of this podcast. I should say we are pivoting.
Well, don't tune out just yet. My next movie that I was talking about is Leprechaun 4 in Space. This time he goes to space.
This is incredible. Had you seen this before?
No, I've never seen this one before. This is the first time watch. The only one I've seen before, as I'm going back through them, is the next one I have, which is Lep in the Hood.
Okay.
That one I have.
I forgot
seen.
You started with 5. Is incredible.
Yeah, I started with 5. So Lep in the Hood's coming up, but this one, Leprechaun 4 in Space. There's a whole lot of guns, a whole lot of violence. It's like totally off script. Leprechaun is not even speaking in rhymes anymore. It's just like shootout in space.
When did this come out?
2002 or 3. First of all,
is he shooting? He has a gun.
He's shooting. He's got guns. I have no idea why he's there. Why is he in space? No clue.
So is it sci-fi? Like at this point, is it like switched genres even? Like, or is there any connection between the other? I thought they all took place on Earth.
Yeah, they do. And
like
then
modern day.
Well, this one he's just in space. Like they just start off and he's just on a planet and he's got a girl and he's trying to like get with her again. It's always like a girl. And I don't know. This one's awesome. But the thing it does is this one has a bunch of sci-fi like references. Like there's like a very heavily inspired Alien homage. They have their
Nice.
own take on the chest burster, and just take a guess where the leprechaun bursts from in this one.
His stomach? What?
No, lower.
I'm cheating a little bit. I might have seen a Letterboxd.
Yeah,
I kind of didn't think they were being for real though.
No, it's like, I mean, yeah, it's a joke. Like it's like a horror comedy, you know. So
yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of crazy stuff like that. At the end, like the leprechaun's like a 50-foot tall leprechaun, and they launch him out of the spaceship. You know, it's like Alien. There's a lot of Alien references. He has a lightsaber at one point. He kills a guy with a lightsaber.
How does he become 50 feet tall?
There's like
was
a
that just always an option?
No, there's like a machine. I mean, if you think about it, it should always be an option because he can like do anything. He's magic, but then like things still happen to him. Where I'm like, okay. I don't know. But yes, he becomes 50 feet tall, and then they blast him out of the ship.
And it's Warwick Davis or Warwick?
It's Warwick Davis, and I'm telling you, he carries this movie because he's not talking in rhymes. It's totally ridiculous. Every actor is horrible, and he is nailing it. Like he's so committed. There's one point where he's in a shootout, and the good guys throw a grenade at him, and he sees it. He tells his girl like, get down. Then he dives on the grenade and just gets blown to smithereens. Dude, Warwick Davis should have won an Oscar. I'm telling you, he's carrying this film.
How much do you think he made off this? If you, like, jokes aside, how much do you actually think he was paid to do this movie?
I don't know. I hope a lot because I mean he was in I think 7 or 6 of them. Yeah, he did 6 of them. And I don't know. I think he's amazing. And actually, I was looking at his like other films that he was in. He was in another Leprechaun movie around the same time where I think the Leprechaun was like less evil. But imagine that
like a different franchise.
Yeah, totally different. Like imagine you're competing. No, it was like a standalone Leprechaun movie that I had never heard of that had like 200 people logged. I'm like, wow, you're in competing Leprechaun movies. Like that's a tough career.
I'm trying to think of what would be the comparison of that. It would be like if in the same year that Ralph Fiennes is playing Voldemort, he is also playing a wizard, but like a good one in like Lord of the... I don't know. I'm trying to think. It's such a stretch.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very specific type of typecasting when you have a guy who could play a leprechaun. I think that's the real reason.
Those are both very exciting. I really thought we were going to get to use this for Oscar talk, so I'm going to use my recent watches to broach this one. The first one, I know you and I wanted to talk about. We're going to have to keep it short just to get to the rest of the podcast, but I finally saw The Brutalist this week.
Oh, yeah.
Immediately, I walked out of it, and it was my favorite movie of 2024, which is kind of cheating because I saw it in 2025. And I do have to admit I'm a bit of a hypocrite because I had some resentment already built up, like some prejudice built up against this movie because I was frustrated that it had such a dominant hold of the Oscars discourse prior to seeing it. And I was like, I dislike when a movie comes out at the very end of the year. It came out December of 2024 or Christmas Day. And, you know, it's essentially only in 2024 for 5-6 days. And so there's part of me that's like, you know, like there's been all this discourse about other movies that have come out and then suddenly like a movie. And also it's a movie that no one has really seen. It's not like it's like this big blockbuster hit. So there was part of me that had some frustration about like, I view the Oscars as like a time to celebrate fantastic art, but also it's ultimately it should boost the industry and make people excited about movies. Mm-hmm. And so this being a movie that was hardly in 2024 and hardly viewed by anybody, I had some issues with. But all that preamble aside, I thought it was just incredible, and I have to eat my own words because I think it should totally win. It's like masterclass. I think it's an instant classic.
I mean, that's what I was going to ask you, but you answered the question yourself.
Yeah, like, no, I'm wrong.
Didn't you walk out going? Well, it's not even right or wrong, but didn't you walk out going like, "Wow, that was something"? Like I haven't seen something like that this year. You know, it's like
how many movies do you see where you're like, going into it, it's like 100 minutes, and you're like, okay, that's pretty short, and there's still a point like halfway through, you're like, oh, okay, that was the first hour. Okay, I thought we might be a little closer here. I mean, this is a 4-hour movie, and granted, there's a 15-minute intermission. I never was like impatient or thought it was slow, and there's some I feel like I read some people saying they liked the first half, didn't like the second. I had no shared feeling with that at all. I mean, they're very tonally different in some ways, but I thought it was just excellent all the way through. The character development, Adrian Brody's performance, the score, that main song for it is so good. I loved it.
I think that's people's opinions anytime it's like a rise and like fall story, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I know this one wasn't like a full fall, but like of course it's super exciting, it's fast paced, it just like rip roars through the first like hour and a half, you know. Like Goodfellas does. And then people like and then the second half can't live up to that, or it's giving you a different feeling. Like there's all kinds of different reasons why it happens, but I think yeah, people
Man,
walk away and they go, I don't know, like I just like the first half so much better. And it's like, I mean, yeah, that's what they wanted.
yeah, I mean, I think to an extent I would get that more, especially once. And I texted you a bit about this, the portions and a little bit spoiler territory here, so you can
Mhm.
skip ahead if you haven't seen it already. But there is a portion like throughout the movie he is addicted to heroin, and there's a scene where he does heroin with his wife when she is having a bout of pain. And you really just think from all the other movies that you've seen heroin or really any drug addiction in, that this is going to be like maybe even a lower point. Like, is she going to OD and die, or is she going to get addicted and now they're both sick? And so yeah, I had some fears there too. But I think my counterpoint to people that felt like they didn't like the fall is every bit of the fall I feel like is really shown to be in the first half already. Like you already see all of the like the gravity of them going downhill with his addiction, with his unhappiness, with the mercurial nature of Van Buren. So it's all there. And actually I found the second half to be really hopeful in a lot of ways too. Like dark stuff happens, but the honesty between Brody and his wife in the movie I thought was like a really beautiful scene. I like that like they end up healing together.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, you make me think about it, but I don't want to get into. I was thinking, man, I don't know if I should say all that and get too into spoiler territory. Like, yeah, maybe it's not even such a fall. But it's making me think about like what the message was at the end. But I don't want to go too much into it. We can always talk about it
Yeah,
another time.
yeah.
I mean, the main point being like, I really liked it, and I was really blown away by it. And I do hope it wins Best Picture.
Yeah, I agree. The other movie I'll talk about in this one will be much briefer for a couple of reasons, but Amelia Perez. I watched that the other day and was just could not believe how much I disliked it. I mean, I think Zoe Saldana is doing a commendable job in her singing and like the vulnerability. She's really going all out there for it, and I think she does a fine job. I think Carla Sofia Gascon does a great job of like, it's really interesting seeing her pre and post transition in that movie. But like the music is really bad, and like the choreography is really uninspired, and to be honest, the plot itself of like, we're supposed to empathize with this murderous cartel lord who like uh, we know hurts women, like it just, the whole thing feels like such a stretch to me that I cannot believe it got 13 Oscar noms. I think it's a huge bummer that it knocked out movies like Dune 2 and others.
Well, yeah, no, I haven't seen it yet actually, so I can't really speak on it. But
And
yeah,
sorry, none of that was too spoilery. I mean, that's like
no,
literally
no.
the plot.
No. And yeah, I'm kind of like reluctantly now feeling like I have to see it. Or I know I actually want to see it. Like I want to be able to weigh in on it actually. But yeah, I've heard a lot of mixed things. So
All right.
we'll see.
Our recent watches aside, let's get into it. So, The Social Network. It's based on the book Accidental Billionaires. Aaron Sorkin, well, the author of that book was shopping it around to potentially get it made into a movie. Sorkin saw it. He began to essentially in tandem write his own screenplay, following the same story of the creation of Facebook. And he did meet with the author numerous times. There wasn't any sort of tension there, but it is kind of funny. You could sort of draw a bit of a parallel between the creation of the screenplay and really the plot of the movie itself, in the way that how things get created and what is the origination and how much does that matter when compared to the actual work to do the thing that you're envisioning. But anyway, moving from there, Sorkin obviously got attached, started writing it, pitched it to Fincher. I think he gave the script to him on like a Saturday, and by that Monday, it was essentially greenlit. So if you look at the dates, it's actually really incredible how quickly it was done. The book came out in 2009. This movie came out in 2010. So that, I mean, and part of that is because they were writing the script and the book in tandem, essentially, and how quickly they got the go ahead to start creating or going with filming. But yeah, I mean, it's super quick turnaround on that. I don't think that you see really any movies that are like that today. I think, the normal timeline for a movie like this is at least 3 or 4 years minimum. And it's also, I would say, especially timely in the sense of like the subject matter was 2003. So, not even really 5 or 6 years before the book is getting written, there is when all the events actually occur. I feel like a lot of times these sort of biopics occur several decades after the fact. But John, do you want to come in with some of the stats on Letterboxd, box office, and those areas?
Yeah. So this is a real popular movie for our generation, I think, especially. 3.9 average rating on Letterboxd, viewed by 3 million. I'll give you the quick summary of the plot. I think you did it earlier, but I like the Letterboxd summary here. You don't get to 500 million friends without making a few enemies. In 2003, Harvard undergrad and computer programmer Mark Zuckerberg begins work on a new concept that eventually turns into the global social network known as Facebook. 6 years later, Mark is one of the youngest billionaires ever, but his unprecedented success leads to both personal and legal complications when he ends up on the receiving end of 2 lawsuits, one involving his former friend. As a $40 million budget with a $224 million box office. So it definitely did well.
I mean, just to zag for a quick second, I know we're supposed to be glorifying this movie. Not that it needs our praise, it already has plenty. It keeps blowing my mind that The Brutalist was $10 million. I mean, God, and this movie looks incredible too, but just think of how big. Anyway, it's a total change of subject. It's obviously very successful. I mean, I don't feel like we really see a lot of movies. I mean, there's a lot of biopics, but I do feel like nowadays a lot of them are more musical oriented. Mm-hmm. I don't know what's the last, biopic you've seen that centered around a business person or someone in that world? Like I could think of Michael Keaton in the franchise movie about McDonald's, but I can't think of any recently.
Yeah, that's that Ray Kroc. Oh, it's like The Founder or something.
Yeah,
I think that's a good example. I'm just looking through my phone here. I'm sure there are examples, but I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Okay, well, moving back to the sequences, it was obviously shot by Fincher, who was the director. The score was done by Trent Reznor, who actually got an Oscar for this movie. And have you noticed how many movies and television shows Reznor is associated with? I feel like there's for a long time I would get told oh yeah, this is like the 9 Inch Nails guys on this thing, and it really took a while for me to realize just how involved he's been in the film industry for over 10 years now.
Oh yeah,
really 15, 20.
I didn't realize it until last year when I went to see Challengers. I saw his name, and I knew his name just from listening to 9 Inch Nails, honestly. So I used to like 9 Inch Nails when I was a kid, and I was like, oh, Trent Reznor, that's the guy from 9 Inch Nails.
Yep.
And then I didn't realize how many films they'd scored. It's incredible, and it's awesome. Now when I hear him, I'm like, oh yeah, that's why I like this soundtrack so much.
Yeah, I'm even watching the Watchmen TV show that came out a couple of years ago because I'm rereading the comic book, which is just incredible. I can't recommend it enough. But yeah, he did the score for that as well, and it's so frequent that I feel like when there's a movie that I like the score enough. There's plenty of movies that I love the score, but I wouldn't necessarily listen to it in my day-to-day. But there's been so many times where I'm like, oh man, this is really, there's some sort of synthy beat going here. It feels kind of clubby, but you can feel the emotion that it's meant to be portraying. And it's been Trent Reznor so many times. So super impressive there. But going into the scenes, I do feel like this movie, compared to so many others that we watch, every other movie we've done a review for so far has obviously been one that we loved. So we have a lot to say about them. But this movie,
except for Dress to Kill, which you hated.
Dress to Kill was pretty bad, to be honest.
Okay.
It had some rough moments.
Continue.
But I do feel like this movie just has so many exceptional, really scenes. There's specific scenes. It's not just the characters and their development over time, but it's seeing them in these specific moments and how they react and how they do or don't grow. That I think is fantastic. So, the first one, the opening scene with Rooney Mara is obviously iconic at this point. But I think that's because of so many different little things that are going on. This isn't a little one, but the color grading throughout this movie is so cool. And there really just aren't a lot of movies that look like this, to the point where it almost makes it feel like it's its own genre. Do you get that feeling?
Oh yeah, and it's like a Fincher thing, right? He uses these greens and Zodiac and other. I was reading about that. I don't know much about the color grading stuff, so I was reading about that. It was interesting.
Yeah, it conveys so much with so little. That opening scene in the bar, there's such a sense of claustrophobia almost. They're really in there. It's dark, low lighting, a lot of voices over them, but the color I feel like is able to convey so much of what the movie is ultimately going to be about, or at least how the characters within the movie are feeling in those moments and the environment around them. Like there's a lot of like the darkness almost shows sort of like the exclusive nature of what's going on here. Like what can you see, what can't you see? There's some mystery, a bit of danger, but like with that, the sort of like almost erotic excitement of that danger, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is a lot of what Zuckerberg's character is sort of chasing. He feels like he's been left out of so many things. A huge part of that is the feminine component of it, right? Like how often does he talk about girls in this movie? And so I think even just little things like the color palette of it really do a great job to really portray what's ultimately going to come up later.
Oh, I agree. Let me ask you something. Like when you're watching this movie, like are you thinking about like real life Zuckerberg, you know? Or like are you thinking as you're going through stuff like that, like, oh, he probably wasn't actually like that? And do you think it matters?
You know, it's a great question. The movie's good enough that I totally lose myself in it. Like when I'm watching this movie, I'm thinking of Jesse Eisenberg as Zuckerberg. So like by that I mean like a character. But there are occasional moments where maybe the back of my brain kind of loses the dream for a half second and is like,
Yeah.
do you think he was actually like this? Is this kind of like what his motivation was? Was he an asshole like this? But I mean, to answer your question, I think it really transports me enough that when I'm watching the movie, I am not thinking of Jesse or of Mark Zuckerberg. But when I am, you know, separately thinking of Mark Zuckerberg on a day-to-day basis as like the CEO of Meta, I definitely fill in some of the gaps of like my understanding of who he is with this movie, which I don't think is actually very accurate at all.
Yeah. No, I think this is like the core of the debate, and that's what's really interesting about this movie to me. And we can get back into the scenes, but if you just think about like all these scenes are so great. Like we're gonna talk about them; they're all so perfect. Like you can talk about all the perfect things. So like, why is there like a debate of is this like movie a classic or not? Like if you actually look through it, it's just like classic scene after one another. And I think it comes down to what we just talked about. I think it's that like it's hard not to mix in like the what's real and what's not, and Zuckerberg's still like a person in our life, you know, that like in this time frame. And I think that's kind of the core of like why there's kind of a back and forth on this and I think like if you just like it's gonna probably in more time become like a classic, like if you just look at like how great the scenes are that we're about to talk about, you know, then it's like, oh yeah, that movie's amazing.
Well, I think one of the interesting and fantastic and horrible things about art is just how much completely separate from the art, whatever goes on in your own interpersonal life or like culture at large can really affect the merit or how it's generally viewed after the fact. Like I remember I watched, this is a funny parallel, but like last year I watched the movie Valentine's Day with my girlfriend, which is the one that has like there's literally like 15 leads of the movie. It's ridiculous. It's not a good movie.
Yeah.
But watching it last year, I actually loved it so much because I was like, this is such a time capsule of 2009 or whenever it came out. Like this would never get made today for 1,000 different reasons. So I kind of appreciate it. But really, that's not through any merit of that movie. It's not like they planned on someday people are going to appreciate this. It just happened to age well for me in particular. But this movie, I think, especially as a biopic, has such a chance of, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of people that are fans of Zuckerberg. I think there's a lot of people that are truly revile him. And I think, you know, it'll be interesting to see, like, in the 15 years since this movie came out, Meta's worth, I mean, first of all, it's Meta now instead of Facebook, but instead of being worth, you know, $5 billion or $1 billion, whatever it was, now, I mean, I'm getting a little bit ahead of it. It's worth $1.3 trillion, you know? So, I mean, it's changed so much more than obviously Fincher or Sorkin ever could have known. And it'll be interesting to see what do people think of Zuckerberg and how does that kind of color their view of the film in the future. Could it ever be a classic? Maybe people will learn to hate it. I mean, it's hard to say.
But that's the kind of thing that happened with Citizen Kane, because he was talking about a real person that people were living with, and that became like the most like highly regarded movie ever, you know, like the #1 AFI list. So that's what I think about. I'm like, damn, like I kind of wanted to talk about this. So Aaron Sorkin, like he has this quote: "What attracted me to the film project had nothing to do with Facebook. The invention itself is as modern as it gets, but the story is as old as storytelling. The themes of friendship, loyalty, jealousy, class, and power. And I was like, damn, that is so interesting. Like that's what this movie is about. So forget, like, let's pretend this guy doesn't exist and it just uses like Facebook as like the framing device and this guy Zuckerberg as like the protagonist, um like how great of a movie it is about like those themes that Sorkin wanted to write about. And that's why I think it's like deserves that classic rating.
It almost makes it even better just because it's sort of so novel to openly just be inspired by a living, and not even just living, like a very still young at the time guy, and choose to be like, there's elements of your story that are enough for me to build a more dramatic theatrical one upon. And like from the get-go, Sorkin's been very open, I believe, that this is not actually very true to life in terms of how a lot of this went. Like the lawsuit pieces are true, but not the the dramatics around necessarily, like him breaking up with his girlfriend, things like that. But I will say, counterpoint to it is, I think there's a lot of people, especially like you and I are obviously big film guys, and still I think there's certainly areas in this movie that we do not know for sure how true or not those are, and we're taking the time to read up on it. Like, what does the average viewer think of the truth of the origination of Facebook? I think it matters. I think if you're talking about art, I think it still matters a bit, but I ultimately agree with you. I just think it's an incredible movie and an incredible narrative, and I totally agree with what Sorkin's doing there. But I know at the same time, I could see if I was Mark Zuckerberg and this was coming out, like, it's, from what I've read, it seems like he had a good sense of humor about it. I think I'd be probably pretty pissed off. He's painted as this misogynist asshole who's petulant and a backstabber. And maybe he is a misogynist because ultimately he did make Face Smash when he was a college kid. But like, I don't know. I've got a lot of people I know in my life that would do something that stupid when they were a 19-year-old kid in college. And I don't think it makes them a horrible person by any means.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I was thinking about today when I was really like thinking about this movie is like, is it a problem with how it was marketed? Because it definitely was marketed as like a Facebook origin story, but like, who cares if it's not, right? Like, all movies are fabricated, even when they're like about a real thing. Like The Blind Side had a bunch of stuff that wasn't real, and everyone loved that.
I think that
movie
might even be worse than this one, because that was really the whole point, is it's supposed to be about the authenticity,
Oh yeah, definitely. So like when I was thinking about this movie, I was like, to me, this is like a what it's like to work hard for something movie. Like you're like, whether you like Zuckerberg or not, and you don't have to like enjoy this movie. Like they're using him as the framing of like what it's like to like work those long hours and like lose relationships with people and like try to work your way up to the top of something. And like in that way, that's why I'm thinking of it more like Citizen Kane or even Oppenheimer. I think Oppenheimer did the same thing. Like, you could argue whether that movie was good or not, but like it's a great like how to go after something story that has some fabrication in it. Like they added some things to that story too.
Well, I'm paraphrasing here, but Fincher, I believe, has a quote along the lines of like, I've predicated my career on the idea that people are perverts. Like there's something, and I think by that, certainly it has the sexual meaning of it, but I also think he's just referring to the fact that people are dark and they have secrets and they're weird, and sometimes they lie and sometimes they like weird stuff. Like there's just a lot of different ways you can interpret it, but the intent is that all of us have things about us that we would like to hide and not show or whatever. And I think similar to like the point of what we were just talking about, like the color grading and how you can see it kind of has almost a feeling of like the unknown and danger, but sort of the attraction of it at the same time. I walk out of this movie watching it last night. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and I still feel like, even recognizing Zuckerberg as basically the bad guy of the movie, and I think in real life as potentially even a much larger villain than that in a much larger way, I totally see the attraction of, I'm like, I'm going to start my own fucking company. I'm going to get back into coding or do whatever. Like I absolutely get it. And I think that's what makes Fincher ultimately successful with it, is because I'm here passing judgment on this man I don't even know. And I might be wrong, but even though I believe him to be morally bankrupt, or at least the character, I still want to be him, or at least some part of me does.
Oh, you nailed it. I mean, I don't think I could have said that better. That's exactly how I feel about it. Is he's trying to frame like, and that's the feeling I walk away with it too. And I'm like, wow, if it like, I was disappointed when it ended, and not because I didn't love the ending, which we can talk about, which I don't know if like I love that's how they wrapped it up with the girl, especially because that's not a
Oh, I
real.
love it.
See, that's not a real thing that happened though, which I don't think matters. That's another thing I want to talk to you about is like, how much of that even really matters with how good of a movie it is? But what you just said, I think, is if that was Fincher's goal, it definitely leaves you walking away with that of like, yeah, man, like it's inspiring to get back. I want to get back into something. I want to start working hard at something, whatever, like that. And it's hard though when it's tied with this person that we have a relationship with, who we might not align with his values, you know? But as an inspiring story of like drive and motivation, forgetting about that guy, it's so great, you know?
Oh yeah. You know, I think in a way so I do like the ending a lot. I love that it's a parallel book ending of the opening sequence where she's breaking up with him. It's like a direct reference where we really haven't seen or heard from Rooney Mara's character at all since that scene, or once towards the beginning. But I think, you know, in one way I like it because of that book ending. I also like it because I think that makes a little bit, while the rest of the movie is very much supposed to be like historic in some ways, at least in its own universe, that to me feels like the movie that's clearly the most cinematic. And so we're like, okay, we can understand that this was certainly like, even if the rest of this was real, which it wasn't, this would have had to have only been written in the mind of the writer. And so we can kind of take a step back and realize it's fiction. But like, it is a moment to look into the mind of like, what would make someone do this? And like, as someone, especially as they get richer and all these different things, you can start to think of them as like, everything must be so like Machiavellian and so orchestrated and thought out. And in reality, I think it's so much of what drives us is just the insecurities we faced when we were children or insignificant or powerless. Like, it's just because you have more power now doesn't mean that your motivations necessarily change.
Oh yeah, I agree with you. I guess my like, and actually your perspective on that makes me like it a bit more. But my issue with that ending, I think, is like, I think like the relationship between Mark, Eduardo, and Sean, like the big three, you know, is more interesting than this girl that they made up. And I did like a little bit of research on it, and I guess there was a girl that he broke up with around that time and like blogged about, but he also like met his wife around this time, like his future wife that he got married to in like 2012. So like, they made that up and made it be like the core of the story, and I was like, man, was that necessary? Like, but then again, like, I really enjoyed the movie. That's a tried and true Hollywood template, right? To have a girl be the inspiration for him to go do something great, you know, a breakup or something. And in that way, like, I'm like, okay, it worked. Like, I like the movie, so it doesn't really matter. But that's kind of where I landed on the ending. But I don't know if it's because it didn't happen that it bothers me. I'm not sure, you know?
Yeah, I think another thing that I like about it is it's not just there to be like a reminder of why did he do these things. It's also there to show him as like, and this is maybe the more obvious piece to it, but it's there to show that he's also like just as desperate for validation or company as the rest of us. He just really does his best to say that he doesn't. Which is maybe sort of a parallel to Rashida Jones' line, if you're not an asshole, you're just really trying to be.
Oh yeah.
Which I think, you know, that's very like Sorkin dialogue. It's very clever and it's fun. It, like, clearly no one would say this to their billionaire client when they're like a second year.
Yeah, she's like an
15
intern.
months into being.
No, yeah.
She's like a junior, so she's a super junior.
Yeah. They're like, hey, can you sit in on this meeting? You know, like, can you shadow? It'll be good experience for you. And she's just sitting there not talking. She's like,
that is a little bit of a nitpick I have for her. And I think Rashida Jones isn't like bad in this. I actually think she's good. I think if I bump, it's a little bit just because of the baggage of, I know her so much from Parks and Recreation that it's like, oh, Anne is here. What is she doing? And what is she doing hanging out with Jesse Eisenberg a little bit? But
yeah. I think for me, it's more like I've been in that role and I definitely didn't contribute like that, you know? So I'm like, I'm more like, this is unrealistic. You wouldn't stay after and talk to the client. Get out of here, you know?
Okay, on that note, I feel like we should talk about some of the other scenes and some of the other characters in this too, because there are so many. We obviously are talking primarily about Eisenberg so far, but like Eduardo, the Winklevoss twins. So that's what I want to talk about next, actually. So we have the opening sequence. We talked about that. We have him creating Face Mash, which has an unbelievable song by Trent Reznor, which we will hopefully have gotten into the video earlier on. And then we get to meet.
I know.
The pressure's on. We're slowly improving the podcast one episode at a time. But we meet the Winklevoss twins. One of the greatest quotes of the century is, I'm 6'5", 220, and there's two of me. It's just a great line reading from Armie Hammer, personal issues aside. I was going to save this for later. This is one of my hottest takes. If we're getting Trump back in the office and Pete Hegseth can have a bunch of allegations against him, he gets to be Secretary of Defense. Could we get Armie Hammer back? I mean, this guy is firing on all cylinders in every movie he's in. He's in Call Me by Your Name. He's in Sorry to Bother You. He's also in a lot of pretty open-minded movies. I'm just putting that out there.
Wait, is he
what?
canceled? No, I'm serious. I didn't know that. I just found out about him. I watched Call Me by Your Name, and I was like, "Oh, this guy's pretty good." And I saw him again last night. I was like, "Oh, this guy's good." What happened?
I'm dying because I had this exact same situation happen to me like 2 years ago after I'd finally seen Call Me by Your Name, and I was like, "This guy, man, he is just incredible."
Well, you saved me.
No, the running joke is that the allegations is that he's like very the joke part is that he's a cannibal. There's some texts I don't know. We shouldn't get too into the tabloid of it.
That's way worse than I was expecting.
It's like he has like there's some text that came out of him saying he's like, I just want to eat your ribs or something like that.
My God.
Allegedly. And I think that's
lowering
really more
my rate.
It's really more built upon, I think he had a not healthy relationship with someone at some point.
Got it.
Allegedly. I might be wrong on this.
Right. I'm gonna take it at face value and start telling people.
But he's so fucking good. I mean, just another in the long list of incredible actors that are just deeply problematic. I mean, Kevin Spacey leads that charge.
Oh yeah.
Oh god, there's one other one I can't think of that is just an S tier actor that we lost. Anyway, so we go from that. We get to meet Sean Parker with a very young Dakota Johnson, who I didn't realize it was Dakota Johnson. That was in the Stanford scene with him.
I had to ask my girlfriend. I said, "Is that Dakota Johnson?" She knew, so she's like, "Yep, that's her." I'd never seen her that young.
What do you think of Timberlake in this movie?
I think he was great. I honestly think he does it perfectly. I saw that they interviewed Jonah Hill for it, and I think that would have totally not worked.
That would have not been the move at all.
Yeah, Fincher was like, "Nope."
It's also just totally different, especially at that point. I mean, and no like body shame whatsoever, but like I think part of his character is supposed to be this like playboy doing this stuff. I think Jonah Hill just being a little bigger of a guy, and especially at that point in his life, he was just younger. I don't know if he would have had necessarily the confidence that Timberlake is bringing. And he's supposed to be sort of this ladies' man. Like, he's supposed to be a playboy out in SF.
Well, and he's supposed to be the one person that Mark is struck by, you know? Like, he's the only guy that Mark isn't, like he's interviewing, or he's talking with the guys from the President's Club or whatever that was, and he's not fazed by them at all, right? But this guy blows him away. So having it be like a celebrity that we're familiar with, I think it's pretty smart also, you know? But I think Justin Timberlake does great. What'd you think?
I think he's good. I don't think he's miscast, because ultimately I think he does nail that. Like, he is supposed to be a villain by the end of, in the movie at least. Mm-hmm. And so when there's parts of me that are annoyed by him, it's like, that's probably intentional. And I think particularly the scenes where he's manic, like when he's saying about he thinks he's being followed, like, I think that's when he's at his best in that role. Mm-hmm. But there are some other times where I think he's just maybe a layer too thick with grease and being a little too slimy, maybe then. It feels like it's like a little bit of a different movie than maybe like Zuckerberg, the way he's talking throughout this. But no, ultimately I like him.
And I think they added that. I don't think he was actually like, I guess I read that there wasn't actually that much of an antagonistic relationship between him and Garfield's character, and like they're still friends to this day.
And so Eduardo and he,
yeah, exactly. So they did add some of that in. But yeah, I liked him.
Okay, next we get to see Eduardo and Mark going to a presentation by Bill Gates with a fantastic, silly little who's the speaker? Oh, it's Bill Gates. Which leads to them meeting two girls off of Facebook. And my next question for you, do we really think a 19-year-old Zuckerberg was even capable of getting a blowjob in the bathroom with his best friend?
No. And so, I mean, just use the same line I just did. Sorry, I just was all over the place there. That also was not in. Like, that was fabricated too. I mean, there's obviously that scene, but just
you think so?
No. But like the partying, like they didn't have like a big party house in Palo Alto or wherever they were. Like that it was a lot of just guys sitting around coding, you know. He was like sometimes drinking and blogging, whatever, but they made it more of like, oh, there's a zip line, you know. So there definitely wasn't those bathroom scenes with the zip line. That's all for the movie for sure.
Yeah, I can buy that. I mean, I also knew too many guys that were like that.
Yeah.
Like even like I interned at Cisco back in college, and so I got like my taste of the Silicon Valley out there. Like everyone I was working with and living, like they crammed all of these interns into like these apartments that were essentially dorms for the summer.
Yeah.
And even the most, I mean, probably especially the most brilliant amongst them, I mean, you just couldn't hold a conversation with these guys. And I like to think of a pretty talkative guy, so I can do 90% of it if need be. And even I was like talking to a wall sometimes. So I have a hard time believing as well that these guys are going on a date with anyone necessarily.
Oh yeah, but question: do you think Brenda's song is good?
That's tough. Actually, I like her in a lot of it. I think the scene where she's at the table trying to like speak quickly with when Sean Parker takes them out to the bougie dinner. I don't know that I blame her so much as the writing feels a little forced. Like we haven't heard anything. All we know about this character is that she's gonna like that she blows a guy in a bathroom next to her friend in the stall.
Right.
So it's like, you know, it's not like an image that makes me think she can talk to Sean Parker and Mark Zuckerberg, like keep up with them when Zuckerberg is like roasting the head of IT security at Harvard.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that's maybe more of a script issue than a Brenda Song issue.
Yeah, I think not so good in the beginning and then good in the end. Like I think when she's mad at him,
Yeah.
I liked that. And then when she's at the bar or at the table at the bar, I wasn't a big fan. So on the same page.
All right. After this, we do have the twins rowing competition in the Thames, which I did have to look up. That's like the river through England, and we see them lose. Couple notes on this. First of all, kind of an interesting sequence of the rowing. It feels pretty tonally different from the rest of the movie. If I was to cut anything or change it or reshoot it, this would be the one for me. I feel like it's actually aged pretty bad.
But was that intention? I'm sure it was an intentional thing, right? I mean, it's like almost like a music video of their race, and like
with some like GoPro footage, like it changes the way it's shot even.
Yeah, I'm with you that I don't know if I liked it. Like it kind of took me out for a second, and I honestly hadn't thought about it again until you just brought it up. Like it was just like a random kind of like a dream that was part of the movie, you know?
Yeah.
I'm sure it was intentional. I'm sure it was like a way for Trent and Fincher to kind of like have some fun because they both have the music backgrounds. You know, Fincher did the music videos for a while, and then obviously Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross. But yeah, no, I'm not a big fan of it.
Other note from this, their father is in the scene for a second, and he's just incredibly supportive.
I don't remember what did he say again? He was like,
they're like, sorry to make you fly out here, Dad. We lost the race, and he's like, don't you ever apologize to me for losing a race like that, and don't you ever apologize to anyone. And he's like so supportive of them in a non-judgmental way. I'm like, you know, I will say this rewatch in general, I feel like I remember the Winklevoss twins being sort of assholes the first time I watched it, right? Like they're perfect and handsome and rich and, you know, intelligent. They're everything that you want to be. And this time I watched it around, I'm like, I mean, yeah, like they're a little bit like elitist, certainly, and like they very pointedly are like, we can't let you pass the bike room when they have Zuckerberg come in. But other than that, I actually think they're pretty, like, dare I say, chill guys. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, they don't do it. And like, they really take their time to be like, we don't want to sue. I think at least as movie characters, I can't speak to the real real Winklevoss twins, the Winklevi, but they're actually not that much. Like, I think Zuckerberg's clearly a bigger asshole than they are in this movie.
Could it be that at the schools we went to, we experienced much worse guys than that? You know?
Oh my God. Yeah. I was friends with worse guys than
because I'm kind of with you that they're naturally, other than the line of like, I think actually the line you brought up earlier is the only one where I'm like, okay, buddy, where he's like, I'm 6'5" and there's two. Yeah. That one's
220 and there's two of me.
But yeah, everything else.
I unironically love that line.
No, everything else is pretty well thought out. Like actually that scene where they're talking to the president of the school is so great. That guy is so funny.
Picks them apart.
Oh
yeah,
my
he's
gosh,
like, I'm like the Secretary of Commerce or something for the United States. I think I might have an opinion.
But then one of the brothers is going to insult him. The other brother's like, no, don't do it. You know?
I think it would have been so easy to write that part too, as like, these guys are just assholes, or these guys are just dumb, or they're whatever. And I think as much as they clown on one of the brothers for being like, because we are men of Harvard,
Right.
which is maybe a silly sentence to say out loud, but I think it comes from like actually a very believable, real sentiment of like this guy comes from like a quote unquote pedigree, or at least he believes
Sure.
that because he's supposed to be like 19 or 20. Like I totally believe all that. So I actually really like them. And if any of you are sad about how things work out for the Winklevi, just keep in mind they're both worth $5 billion now. They both made $2 billion in the last like 2 years alone from Bitcoin. So
Yeah.
I think they're doing just fine.
And I also think, well, I don't think I read it, that their involvement in the story was much more inflated for this movie. Like there was a lawsuit, and there was like there's a lot on this. You'd have to go and read it yourself to really fully grasp it. But it's they definitely pumped it up and made them more of the villains of the story than they were in real life.
You know, I will say, as much as I was saying, I remember them being assholes originally. I didn't really feel like they were this time around. I will say the other side of it is I do feel like their lawsuit is even sillier than I once thought. Like I think it pumps it up a lot. That like one issue the movie I do have is it suffers from the same problem a lot. Any movie that includes high schoolers or college people in it is they're very much portraying them to be, they're supposed to be of their age, but they're 100% showing them to be people in their late 20s, like the actors themselves are. And so like the Winklevi's business side, like their friend, who I don't know who the character's name was, but the third with them, you know, he's bringing very much an air of professional corporatism. I know what I'm talking about. We're going to, you know, I want damages, I want legal jargon, whatever. It very much makes it feel more legitimate than I think this was just what it actually was, which was a couple 21-year-olds, I believe, that were like, hey, we're going to do something that, in all honesty, isn't that different than MySpace or the, you know, friend social networks of the day. And so for him to have a 6-week head start on them for coding, and he does all of it, it's like, it's actually kind of ridiculous to me that they got 65 million or whatever it ended up being. Like that's actually a pretty ridiculous case in my mind.
Well, yeah, and the real story is even more complicated and like not good for a movie. Like I think it's like they didn't have much of a case for what they showed in the movie to get 65 million. But when you read the real lawsuit, like it's like, oh, okay. Like it was something like they hired him to work on that project, Zuckerberg, after like another guy recommended him. And like it's much more nuanced what they sued him for. It wasn't for like stealing their idea, although they were working on like that same idea of like you have to have a .edu password to get to like sign up. And so it's a combination. But it makes sense why they told it this way in the movie, because the real story is much less interesting, and just boiling it down to like they stole my idea, I think is a much better way to tell a Hollywood story, you know?
Okay. Next we have, I'm just calling a series of scenes the Eduardo's no good very bad day era. We get to see Eduardo fly to Palo Alto. It's raining. He's left on the tarmac. Truly S-tier asshole performance from Jesse Eisenberg of him being like, oh, well, you left me there. I've been in the rain for an hour. He's like, oh, you got to check out the site. We've been working a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Just such a fucking asshole. I should also say, just before I forget, the scene where Face Mash gets huge in the beginning has a perfect cut where all the guys are like, left, right, oh my god, I can't even see the person on the left. And it cuts to these girls very legitimately like staring, and they're a little horrified, and this is such, in a lot of ways, really early days for the internet. And so the idea of seeing your face on there was probably like, oh, okay, like I've seen my face on a directory before that like my college has, and like maybe I have a blog, maybe I probably don't. And now I'm seeing like me next to this girl who maybe I think is prettier than me. Like so sad. And the hard cuts to left, right, just immediately. It's so expertly done, and it's so good with the music. Okay, back to Eduardo's no good very bad day. Then flies back to New York City.
He also has a great, before he does that, he has a great line, which I'm like, wow, like I need to remember that, of like when Zuckerberg tries to like invalidate his feel, he's like, oh, you're just upset from your flight, you know? And he's like, no, it was the 2 hours, you know, like he like reminds him of what he's upset about. It's like, it wasn't actually fun. I'm like, yeah, that's it. You know, that's right. Like, it's not
you just had a long flight. It's like, no, I had an hour on the tarmac at JFK.
Exactly.
And then, in between I had a long flight. Yeah, it's a great line.
Yeah. Sorry. Continue.
And then flying back to New York, having Brenda Song go absolutely crazy, setting the bed on fire. with the scarf is fantastic. And then flies back to SF for the million user party and finding out that his shares have been liquidated to 0.03%. But I got to say, the Letterboxd reviews, just the amount of them referring to that 0.03% kill me. This is actually probably the funniest Letterboxd review, like, comment section I've seen.
It's funny. And that kind of just like proves that it's probably the iconic scene. You know, if that's the one that everyone's making jokes about, that's the scene of this movie. I think it probably is the best scene of this movie. Yeah, Andrew Andrew is so good in it. Jesse Eisenberg is so
the confrontation at the end is fantastic. And it's really interesting. I mean, throughout the movie, especially in the legal sequences where he, you know, essentially Eisenberg is supposed to be dueling with these very seasoned, expensive lawyers,
right?
And he's really just cutting them apart. I mean, obviously, you would never say all these sorts of things in a real sort of private hearing, but like we're like led to believe, and we do believe, at least I do, that like this guy's fucking sharp as a whip. I would really rather not be in an argument with him. And it's cool seeing like Eduardo as someone that throughout the movie is able to make him stop and like think about things for a little bit, and like he's very like fully using that when he's in this final confrontation with Eisenberg because he sees him for who he is, or Zuckerberg, I should say.
Yeah.
I absolutely love when he throws the fake jab at Sean Parker. I think is so fucking good. The line of I like standing next to you, Sean. You make me look so tough. It's such a good fucking line out of this guy who it's a little bit like we haven't seen this. Eduardo's kind of a pushover for most of the movie prior to this. So it's a little bit, there's a little bit of a dissonance there. But I think it's fucking incredible. Like, ooh, okay, Eduardo, let's let it out. Let the dog out.
And like, I feel like I totally get that character. Like, he does such a good job acting that role of like, you know, he's his friend, but he's like trying to get an internship. He's trying to weigh out the options, trying to be smart. Like, he's trying to get some advertising because that's like the world he knows, whatever. And then like, you just get that glimpse into him at the end of like, okay, and like he's got a little fight, you know, he got a little fight in him. All right, got it. Like, you just totally get that guy. I don't know.
It's so good, and it also helps. He's wearing a great suit. You know, he doesn't know if he's supposed to be there for a professional thing or for a party, so he's dressed for both. But he's looking good in that thing.
And wait, does someone make a joke about it too? Wasn't there?
He says that when he's in the hearing. He's like, "Oh, they invited me. They emailed me to come out. I didn't know what I should wear it for."
Yeah. But maybe I'm mixing up movies. I thought someone then makes a joke about like, oh, like you didn't know it was supposed to be like this. I can't remember though. Something about Prada. Maybe I'm thinking about a different movie.
Is there anything else you want to say about the final showdown sequence?
I don't know, man. I mean, you really covered it. I just think that relationship between those guys in that final showdown is so great. And like, if they had found a way to end it, focusing on that relationship, the breakup of that friendship, I would have been even more happy. That is probably all I had to say about the last part.
Yeah, I mean, the twist of the knife there is just so brutal, and I think they do a great job too of like, similar to I think the tropey way of writing the Winklevi would have been to make them stupid or assholes or whatever. I think for Eduardo, if they make him, they have to walk a line of he's a good guy and he's the social one and he's the one sticking his neck out there for his friend and he cares about him and he's the only one that does, even when people tell him it's in his best interest not to, right? I think it's a thin line though, because they can't just make him like he's always sweet and he's the best amongst us, right? Like, because if they do, it almost makes the twist feel inevitable, like something's going to happen to this guy. And also, he wouldn't feel human. Like, you know, Eduardo's also trying to get laid and he's being a college kid and he's stressed and all these things. And, you know, it's sort of like the reason they say like the ninth circle of hell is for the betrayers, because there's just nothing worse than to like twist the knife on a guy who's put himself out there for you. So I think it's fantastic. It's really just the cherry on top is that laptop smash though, is so satisfying. Oh, yeah. Seeing him when he's wired in, just breaking that thing is incredible.
Yeah.
And then we get the outro facts. The twins get 65 million. As I mentioned before, they're now worth like 5 billion a pop. I believe it's what I've read online is they were big into the crypto market, so they hit that. So
they started one of those crypto
exchanges or something.
Exchanges, yeah. I can't remember which one it is, but they started one of those.
There you go.
Gemini, I think it was Gemini.
Oh fuck! Wow, that's a big one too.
Yeah, in like 2014 or something. They started it like early. I think that's crazy. Yeah.
Eduardo, if you were concerned about him, he is now worth $50 billion. He's the richest man in Brazil, so I guess things are okay for him, you could say. Zuck is now worth 220 billion as of January 25th of 2025. So, I mean, I'm sure that could double in a month. Who knows?
Yeah.
And Facebook, John, do you have any idea what there's two numbers I want you to guess for.
Okay.
Their number of how many users, how many accounts do they have? And how much money is the company worth?
Well, money, I think it's like 2 trillion, right?
I saw 1.6 trillion.
1.6 trillion.
But
okay,
I mean, I'm sure that the source varies a bit on that.
No, but it's probably not crossed the 2 trillion mark. I thought it was coming up on that. Now, the amount of users, I want to say like 5 billion or something crazy like that.
It's 3 billion.
Oh my
gosh.
It's
like
that's
not
crazy.
Quite half of humanity. I think there's like 8 billion humans or close to 9 maybe. Which the math on that is interesting because it ends up being roughly $530 a user, which is really interesting to think that a website that charges you nothing to use, essentially just the act of you creating it, has netted them $530 in value, which some of that, not to get too econ-y here, but I mean, a lot of that is just people are bullish on the technology of Facebook in general, what it's capable of doing. Some of that's just the fucking day trading that Wall Street has become, and a lot of these companies are artificially overvalued. But I mean, it's still fascinating. There's just a ton of value that advertisers are willing to spend to get the sort of data of like getting eyeballs on the product that is relevant for the users. But again, $530. I mean, that's not a small amount of money, especially when you think of this in not a US sense, but that includes people in plenty of second and third world countries too, right? Like that's an aggregate amount. So pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, not to get too down on like the finance route, but I think if like I'm just thinking about it as you're saying it, like the amount of data they have on people, to have 3 billion people in the world, and they've collected that data from people, they can sell to like an advertiser like, hey, we really know people, like we'll be able to get your product to the people who like we think we can influence, you know? So they probably like they've really maxed out their game to be worth a lot of money to an advertiser, and that's really crazy to think about.
Yeah, agreed. All right, so I've really touched on most of my highs. I do want to just call out the dialogue in general is just really punchy.
Yeah.
There is not an ounce of fat throughout this entire movie, which, you know, again, very Sorkin-y in that way, but it just keeps the movie going at such a clip that is really incredible for the runtime and the drama that it's still able to maintain. Like it almost feels like it's a courtroom movie. I mean, I guess it literally is in some regards, but ultimately it's a business movie, it's a tech movie, it's a friendship movie, but it just moves so quickly.
Did you watch it with subtitles?
I did not know.
So my girlfriend prefers them, and I actually don't mind them because I can look away from them. It was like too fast to read the subtitles, which is crazy. I've never had that before. Like the dialogue,
buy that.
And there's definitely scenes where you don't want like the point isn't for you to understand what Mark's saying. Like he's supposed to be like rapid fire talking about all this like coding stuff, you know? So if you're like trying to read and keep up and understand it, like you're actually doing what the movie doesn't want you to do, is understand what he's saying, you know? So it is interesting to think about how subtitles, which so many people watch with now, you know, impact a movie like this.
Yeah, and on that note, just Jesse Eisenberg, I want to say it again, is so perfectly cast in this. Like he is exactly, this is one of the best casting choices I can think of, or I certainly can't think of one that's better. Like he's just so in that perfect sweet spot of like hyper intelligent, but like misanthrope and insecure, but like so guarded intellectually in this bulletproof casing. But like really the casing just makes him all the more miserable for it because it's impossible for him to see any other view than his own. I think he's incredible in this movie.
Yeah, me too.
And he did get Oscar nominated for it, though he didn't win.
Well, yeah, what else did you look that up? I forgot to look that up. I think it was 3 Oscar noms, right?
No, it got a number of Oscar noms.
Oh, really? Or maybe 3 wins. Maybe that's what I saw. There was 3 Oscar wins. While you look for that, I did want to mention that club scene is so good. And like
with Sean Parker.
Yeah, I know people talk about it, but like the volume is mixed so well of like what a real conversation at the club is like.
Do people make fun of it? Like they can't hear each other?
I've heard people say that, so I don't want to claim it as an original thought of like that's a good example of like how it actually sounds in a club. But I
Okay.
wanted to bring that up to you. Of like, if you think about it, like that is like the perfect amount of like yelling, and like that volume is just balanced so well for like what that conversation feels like.
John, I know you're not hitting the club anymore, right?
Oh no,
Were you
no.
ever hitting the club? Like in college,
Oh
you were definitely
yeah,
hitting it, right?
yeah.
I'm serious. Were you?
Yes, they were like when I
Okay.
first got there. Like I thought I was like, oh, this is what everybody does. Like we have to go to the two biggest like warehouse nightclubs back to back, like Friday, Saturday night. There was a bus that took us from campus, and yeah, it was just like madness in there. And I wouldn't want it any
Oh
other
yeah.
way, but I would never do that again. You know?
I mean, it's so funny, John, that you and I both ended up in like the consulting world when like you went to FSU, I went to ASU.
Yeah, I know.
Like honestly, I think that those are the two. If they are not like, who gives a fuck about what's the biggest party school or not? I think
No.
they're at least perceived to be the two biggest, right?
At the time
like,
that we were there, for sure. I don't know about
yeah,
now, but yeah, definitely.
maybe that's a good point. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and that's I think that's such an important thing to keep in mind here because it's again the challenge is they talk like so many of these characters are talking like because they're their actors actually are in their mid-20s, late 20s, or even their 30s, and the whole time you should keep in mind that these are horny, moronic, inexperienced, naive geniuses that like just have such fucked up values of what really should be important in their lives essentially. I mean,
Right.
Anyway, I just think that's such an important thing to keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah. No, I
all
agree.
of the decisions that are made in this movie are so
For
fucked up.
sure. For sure.
And then my last high that I wanted to touch on again was just the cinematography, coloring. I mean, those are both separate things, but
yeah.
Someone that is uneducated in that regard, I just want to say I love those. I think it's so of its own in the way that it's shot and just how it looks and feels that it manages to somehow, it feels like it's a genre movie and it feels like it's a genre of its own. Like I feel like we're in a different world when we're watching it while still getting to maintain all of the stakes that I would understand in my own life,
Yeah.
So I think it just has the best of both worlds with that.
I completely agree. You want to know what it won for?
Oh yeah.
Screenplay, best adapted screenplay, best film editing, and best original score.
And what were the nominations for?
Oh man, I got everything: best picture, best director, best actor, cinematography, sound mixing. So not everything, but a lot.
Okay. All right, I have a couple nitpicks.
Go ahead.
All right, my first one here, I know I can feel in my bones that you have this. If you don't have this, I'm actually going to be pretty surprised. It looked great at the time, but after 15 years, seeing their breath in the cold just didn't age that well. You can totally tell.
Yeah, it looks bad.
It doesn't look very good.
I forgot about that, but I remember thinking it when I was watching it. So yes.
It's a little messy now.
Yes,
I mean, no shame. It was fucking 2010. Who gives a shit? It's not what the movie's
about. We got better
about,
TVs now. That wasn't.
Yeah, it's a little different. It's a little
tough.
Different. And then I mentioned it earlier, but the Rashida Jones, I think is just, I maybe would have recast that. I feel like we could have gotten that a little bit, I don't know, something a little different. But again, maybe that's a little bit of the writing as well. It's not a huge thing.
I don't disagree with you, but I also like her. So I like seeing her in movies. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, what about you? You have anything?
No. I had a couple questions I wanted to ask you. Is it time for that?
Yeah.
Okay. Where do you think this sits in terms of other movies within the 2010s? Like, is this one of the best movies from that decade? Because that's the point I've heard before. I wanted to see if you agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, like certainly, like on the big pick, a lot of the Ringer people have voted this like their movie of the century, actually, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's really excellent. And I would say even I can respect like the craftsmanship of making a movie, like the score, the editing, the writing, the acting. Everything is, I think, about as good as any movie can be. And so I think at that point, a lot of times it just becomes a question of taste. So I think if I was going to speak to strictly like the skilled artisan sides of this, absolutely. I think the story is so good. It's so inventive. I think it's incredible. I would have to think more about, for me personally, if it's one of my personal favorites. So I'm not sure on that. What about you?
Well, so I mean, this is what I want to wrap the conversation with. Also, is like my score, but I'll give it to you now. I mean, I think it's 5 out of 5. I really did think a
Mm-hmm.
lot about this, and part of the criteria is why it is not one of my favorites, like the way that we talk about Alien or like some Tarantino movies that are, Pulp Fiction and Once Upon a Time. I like really respect it. Like I think it's perfectly shot, perfectly edited, perfectly acted in. It works in that Hollywood template, and if you're looking at it like a like how to achieve something great story, like it's perfect. I have no marks, no critiques. Like it achieves the goal that it set out of like tell this great story of this young billionaire,
Mm-hmm.
not knowing what he would become or anything. It's just telling that come up story and adding to it. And where it sits in the 2010s, Whiplash, Inception, Shutter Island, Spotlight. I think it's on par with those. I understand it. I wanted to ask you also, where do you think it sits in Fincher's list? And how much of Fincher have you gone through?
Well, I want to go back to that first question
Okay,
actually
go ahead.
just
Yeah,
one more time really quickly. So I think in my head, I there's movies that I've referred to as a perfect movie that are not like my favorite movie or even like I'm sure maybe almost anybody's favorite movie, but like I think it's easier to explain it with an example. I think Pirates of the Caribbean, the first and second are both perfect movies in the sense of just like you were saying a second ago, not everyone might love every aspect of them. I think they do exactly what they set out to do and what they are telling you as an audience to expect. And I
right.
think they do it really, really, really well. And so I feel that way about this. I think as a biopic drama borderline, I don't know if you could say thriller, but I mean it's certainly like there's doses of comedy and thrill in there, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's perfect to that. I think it absolutely crushes at that. So I just wanted to sprinkle that in there. As for the Fincher list, I haven't seen a ton of Fincher stuff. I've seen Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I've seen
Do you like
this.
that one? I really like that one. I don't think a lot of people do.
I think I really need to rewatch it.
Okay.
I did like it. It's really, I mean, obviously really fucked up and heavy.
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
that one.
I mean, it's based on a really tough book too. So yeah.
So I think it's maybe just less my style. And sorry, this is what I was going to say a second ago to your other point about what makes a movie like amongst your favorite. I do think one thing this is missing a little bit is like a bit of rewatchability, and it's not because of the performances or the writing, because I think those are both so good. I mean, everything about this movie is excellent. I think it really is just the fact that it's a biopic. Like, how many times could I watch a movie about this half real, half fake story about a real person?
But
Especially when it's someone that's like this multi-billionaire who, like, I don't know, I think might be like destroying the world, to be honest.
No, I
like,
agree, and I understand
it ruins
that.
it for me a little.
And that's I get that, and it's not even an argument. It's like this is maybe the other side of the coin, which is like I'm not even thinking of it as a biopic. I'm thinking of it as like a story of like how you go after something, And in that way, I think it's awesome. And like the way I walked out of Oppenheimer, and I was like, wow, that's crazy. I wasn't thinking about the morality of the nuclear bomb.
Yeah,
I was
fair.
going like, wow, like that's a guy who like didn't quite know his path and like ended up becoming one of the most important people to ever exist. I'm like, wow. So if you're looking at
that's a great point.
Yeah, that's how I'm seeing this one, and that's what I'm comparing it to.
And I think that a lot of my issue with it, I think it will default to your point of view a lot more in the future. I think it'll be proven to be true in the sense of just, again, it's not just recent, it's literally contemporary. Like this is an ongoing story that we all interact with. Like I was about to say, as an example of a movie that's rewatchable and excellent is, Goodfellas, right? But in reality, that's also a biopic. I mean, and again, and like you could almost say these are sort of comps in a sense of like they're very much dramatized, right? But like these are real stories of people that did fucked up things and, are very much human at the same time. But like if I watched that movie in like, it came out after the fact, but if I watched that in like the 60s or 70s when it was fucking happening, I probably would feel a little bit different. I think in the future when it's, maybe when either Zuckerberg is dead or, just enough time has passed, people might be able to see it more so as a story of striving than of a biopic.
Yeah, no, I agree. I definitely agree. I think thinking like because it impacts our daily lives, it's tough to pull that out right now. and I think it will probably in like the long run be like a very high regarded one. I'm very happy that it will be that. But I understand, like, actually, to your point about rewatchability, I don't think I'm going to go fire this up the same way I would go fire up Goodfellas, because that's a movie I enjoy much more. But I think it deserves the 5-star rating. I actually had a harder time thinking of why it wouldn't for me, so I ended up going with it. Like, just the fact that when it ends, I'm like, oh, that's it. Like, I was still like, I thought there was more. You know.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I mean, we've spent the past hour talking about how much we love it, so it is definitely excellent. I think I gave it myself a 4.5. I think I love it. I totally agree. I mean, it's one of those movies where we always say, like, the difference between a 4.5 and a 5, and ultimately the rating itself is silly, right? But it gives us an idea of what we thought about something at a given point in our lives. At least that's my thought on Letterboxd. I think the difference between a 4.5 and a 5 to me is just, one of taste. Like, either way, it's crafted excellently and it's groundbreaking and it's like full of talent and discipline. It's just, this isn't one, to be honest, it kind of stresses me out in some ways, the way it makes you think about the people that run, a company that's worth like almost several trillions of dollars, and like some of those pieces. And there's part of me that very much is like, holy shit, like, what could I have done if I could go back in time and be 16 again, and like choosing schools and doing that sort of stuff, It has you feeling a lot of different things. And I think it's because the movie's so effective. Like, it makes you feel tense because it's evoking something within you and you believe it to some degree. But yeah, I think it's absolutely excellent.
No, it's so interesting that you said that, just because that's like literally the exact thought argument I was having with myself last night and this morning about like 4.5 versus 5. It's like we just we both landed on like an inch away. Yeah. So it's cool. It's like that's the way you just said it is like, yep, I was just thinking, that's what I was thinking.
All right. I think that was everything that I have, John. Do you have any other questions? Anything else you want to say?
No, I think that was good. I liked where we ended that.
This was a good sesh.
It was great.
What do we have for next week? Next week, I am going to be flying to Sundance. It's Sundance week 2. So I'm going to get to go to a couple of the indie showings out there. I already have some tickets for some things, but there's others that we'll just have to wait. Basically, the way that Sundance works is they have all these indie films come out, obviously, but how they succeed or fail, the first week will determine if they have extra showings or like additional screenings for the most popular movies. So very much looking forward to that. John and I are going to try to record an episode then, so we can have maybe a little Sundance on the street, like a street reporting episode would be very fun.
Sure. I'll take your lead on. Yeah, you drive that ship. I'm down. I'll dial in remote and I'll do what you need me to do.
I'm gonna get one of those mini mics and interview people goers on the street, asking them what their favorite movie was, what was the worst thing that they've seen so far.
Yeah, we've seen people get real famous off of that. So go for it.
Awesome. All right. Well, as always, everyone, I should say we got over 100. We got like 120 views on our last video, which is, I think John and I are pretty close to just doing this thing full time. Clearly, the money is coming in. The sponsors are coming in. We had 3 people watch the whole thing, not including John or I or our girlfriends or parents or family or friends.
Yeah.
That's 3 real views.
This is all we ever wanted, man. We should have gone out on top, but Just to Kill should have been it.
Yeah, this was kind of a mistake.
I know. What are we doing?
But that said, if any of you do have any thoughts on what we should watch in the coming weeks, please comment them below, like and subscribe if you want some more, and we will see you guys next time.
All right.
Thanks all.